Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Eryn Groman, the Director of Partnerships for the Center for Communication, and welcome to this office hours session. For those of you who've never participated in office hours before, they are 1 hour Q&A sessions between our students and top media professionals. Today we welcome Eryn Mathewson, who is a producer at CNN Audio. Eryn joined CNN in April 2020 and is a producer for the podcast Silence is Not an Option with Don Lemon, which highlights people who took a stand for justice despite significant personal and professional risks. She's also produced for Dr. Sanjay Gupta's podcast Chasing Life and writes stories for CNN Digital. Previously, she worked at the Undefeated at ESPN as the coordinator of the Roden Fellows Program, which develops aspiring sports journalists at HBCUs, and wrote stories centered on the intersection of race, sports, and culture. She received her bachelor's from Howard University and her master's degree from Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism. We're going to hear a little bit about Eryn's career journey and her role at CNN, and then turn it over to you for your questions for Eryn and maybe her questions for you. A quick reminder, during the breakouts, you're going to have control over your audio and video at all times. We ask that you remain on video for the duration of the session, just so we can see you, while keeping yourself on mute unless if you're speaking. To ask a question, we're going to use the raise hand function at the lower right hand side of your screen, and Eryn is going to call on you to ask your questions. Please unmute yourself and state your name and your school affiliation and ask your question. And another quick reminder, just to try to be succinct and be mindful, letting everyone have their turn so we can get to as many questions as possible. And now we'll segue from Eryn with an I to Eryn with a Y. Take it away, Eryn.
Thank you so much, Eryn. Love both the spellings, by the way. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this workshop. So nice to meet all of you. Before I get started, I just have a quick question. I'm just curious where everybody is from. I heard there are a bunch of New York students. If you are in the New York area, can you do your wave hand function? Just curious. Seeing some nods. Okay, nice. Okay, what about Chicago? Anybody Chicago? Okay, I see you. How about California? In Cali? Okay, cool. Any place, where did I miss? Where are other folks from?
I'm from Turkey, actually.
Oh, wow. Well, who said that? I'm sorry. Who said that?
It's me, Sana. I can't really turn my camera on because I'm literally on a job, but I'm committed to the workshop, so I'm here. But yeah, I was in New York, but I'm from Turkey. I'm in Turkey right now.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm from New Mexico, much closer, but thank you. It's so great that you're here. Great, cool. I just want to kind of get a sense of where everybody was from. I spent some time in California, and I'll get to that. I almost moved to Chicago for a job, so that's love Chicago as well. And I'm currently based in New York City. Oh, Texas, nice. My mom is from Corpus Christi. So basically, this is pretty casual, everyone. I'm just gonna share with you my story, kind of like my career journey. I'm going to stop intermittently. So if you have questions or have any comments, please raise your hand. I want this to be very interactive. And yeah, I want you to get as much out of this as you can. And I think before I start, I think if there's anything I'd like you to take away from my talk, it's to make sure people know your goals. I will say that I have gotten to CNN by just letting people know where I want to be. Do I want to work for NPR, CNN, produce audio, whatever? When I tell people, they can also go and tell people, because I guarantee you a lot of conversations happen about you when you're not in the room. And people get to know you, they know your work, they'll spread it or not. And so just make sure people know what you want to do. And I know you're figuring that out probably, but when you do know, it's good. Okay, so I would describe myself as a late bloomer. I did not know I wanted to go into journalism until probably my late 20s. So I kind of, when I got out of, I went to college, I went to Howard University, and I studied anthropology and Spanish. And at first I thought I was going to pursue an academic career. That ended up feeling a little boring. I thought I was going to be a teacher. I learned that I was better one-on-one than in the classroom. I worked in prison justice reform, which was incredibly enlightening, but also very depressing. And so I kind of wasn't sure where my path was going to go. I also, oh, nice. Oh, cool. Cuban living in Chicago. Awesome. And I also worked for a couple of foundations for a while because I was very curious about how money and philanthropy kind of influence change. So I have definitely explored a lot. And while it just happened to be that while I was working at a foundation, I happened to be having a conversation with a coworker and said how much I loved Terry Gross from Fresh Air. Has anybody heard that program or know who she is? Okay, if you don't know, look her up. She's, I think, one of the best interviewers in the business. She works for WHYY in Philadelphia. So I just really love how Terry interviews. I just thought she just sounds so casual and warm, and the conversations were compelling. And I was like, if I could do that for a living, and I didn't even know what it was, I didn't even know what the terms were that you have host and all that stuff, that would be awesome. I happened to share this with a coworker, and she says, oh, well, why don't you come to the local Pacifica radio station? At the time I was in San Francisco, California. And she's like, why don't you come to Berkeley? They give classes on how to produce radio. You can learn everything you want. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. So up to that point, I had no training, just kind of interest. So I go to Pacifica Radio, which, by the way, if you are near one, they're often strapped for cash, but they are great in terms of free trainings on journalism and especially radio journalism. So they're a great resource if if that's ever of interest. So I quickly, they trained me on how to write for the ear, and I started working for their weekend news program. And how many of you are familiar with what audio producers do? You guys have a good sense? Okay, a few. Okay, cool. So basically, I was a reporter and producer. So I would get stories like, I would do local stories. So if there was a protest at a local park and how, I think there was a park being closed and it was going to affect the local homeless population. I went to the protest, I would interview people, I'd come back with the tape, I had a little audio kit. I'd choose the clips I wanted. I wrote an intro and outro for the anchor, and I'd file it. And I would also, sometimes I couldn't go out in the field. I remember having to do a story on a local lake that was being contaminated, and the Department of Agriculture had to do something about it. And so I had to call the Department of Agriculture and get tape from the radio station. Also did the same thing, get the clips I want, write an intro and outro for the anchor, file. And my stories would be about 3 minutes long on a range of topics. Some of them I was just learning about for the first time that day. And it was very fun, but I only had 3 minutes and it just felt so short. And so the same friend who told me about Pacifica Radio also told me about a podcast called Women's Magazine. And they covered, for an hour, they covered news and politics from a feminist perspective. That was their tagline. And so we got to do much longer interviews and kind of talk about a wider range of topics with different people. And I found over time that I preferred the long form over the quick news. I liked news, but I liked long form better. And so I did that for about 4 years. This was all weekend, and I was considered unpaid staff, which is what Pacifica relies heavily on. So we can also talk about making sure you're compensated when you work. That's very important. But I was definitely, in my case, I had a full-time job, and I was working on the weekends. And that's actually what I thought I had to do to be a journalist. All of my coworkers did that. We all had full daytime jobs doing whatever, not related to journalism, and then did our thing on the weekend. And I just knew the journalism industry, it was hard to get a job, or it seemed that way. So I was kind of content to do that. And then one day I had a talk with my dad, and he was like, if you want to do this, let's really do it. Like, commit. So the next step in my story, I don't know that I would recommend this, but it worked. So I basically, there weren't a lot of paid job openings at Pacifica, or where we're at the time in Berkeley. So I decided I needed to leave the market, and I wanted to leave California for other reasons. I'd say, yeah, we can talk about that too. I just needed a change of scenery. So my sister has been in New York since 2009. And so she was like, you know what, you can come stay with me. Let's see what you can do in New York. New York is a huge market. I don't know that I think it's the best way to start a career, or best place to start a career, but if you can, it's amazing. So I wouldn't discourage it. I would just say, it's also consider other smaller markets, because there's just a lot of competition here. And I learned that very quickly. I came to New York, and I'd had my experience producing radio for 4 years up until that point. I get here, I apply for internships. I don't even apply for paid jobs. Got nowhere. To the point where I really was kind of like, maybe I just suck. Like, maybe people just know something that I don't, and maybe it's time to just choose a different career. And my boyfriend at the time was like, why don't you just apply to why don't you apply to graduate school and just see? And then, if you don't get in or whatever, we'll go from there. Mind you, I just want to say ahead of time, I don't think you have to go to journalism school to become a journalist. I think if you are able to get a job and start working, get that experience, that's amazing. I support that. I think, but journalism school is a really great option if that's, if you want extra training, you want to build your network. I think it's really great. And that's what I needed. I needed basically someone to say, we can vouch that Eryn Mathewson is not full of BS and that she can do the job. And you have this institution behind you. So I applied to Columbia's graduate school, mainly because you didn't have to take the GRE. You did have to take a writing test, but not the GRE. And I got in, and I think it was a game changer. Meaning, I don't know that people see that you see that I went to Columbia. People are just like, oh my gosh, hire her. But it's certainly more opportunities opened up once I graduated. So I did the part-time program. Oh, yes, I'm seeing a hand. I'll stop here.
Hi, I'm LaShanta.
Hi, LaShanta.
I wanted to ask you specifically about Columbia because I'm actually applying to their graduate program for the School of Arts for their creative producing track.
Oh, great.
And I wanted to know, like, as a Black woman, as a woman of color in this industry, I work in entertainment and the arts and music and film. I wanted to know, like, how was your experience navigating those waters, being that you're already talking about it? And what was it like, going through that process straight after college and not really having concrete experience in that kind of way?
I did have concrete experience because I didn't go to grad school until 10 years after I had graduated undergrad. So I was a bit older than a lot of the students that I went to school with. And I would say, having gone to Howard, I do feel like I just had a really strong sense of who I was and what I wanted to write about and what I thought needed to be said about race. And I brought that with me to class, and it felt like it was respected. I would say it was more my work schedule that was hard to navigate than anything about race. Although I did notice that there were not many Black professors when I was there. And I definitely asked about that. And I was like, why? And I encouraged the dean to look into that. But in terms of assignments, I never got pushback when I wanted to cover issues about racial justice, because it was the same time that I enrolled in 2014. So that was when around the time Michael Brown was killed. And so it was very much on people's minds, on the campus and just in nationally.
Thank you. Okay, that was
great. I can share my information afterwards if you want to talk more.
Okay, great. Please, thank you.
Also, so kind of my experience at Columbia was pretty good. Very different from Howard.
I
would
can
say,
imagine going to the HBCU, that the Mecca that Howard is.
yes. And also, yeah, it's just culturally, New York is different. Also, graduate student life is different. And I was in the part-time program, which allowed me to work and go to school. And that was helpful. But so I was in a 2-year program instead of the 1-year track. And I actually really enjoyed that. I felt like I got a little more time at school, and that was nice. So I graduate in 2016, and I immediately get an internship with the Takeaway at WNYC. Now, mind you, this is the same place that I could not even get they didn't even respond to my application when I first moved to New York. And I get there and I'm like, okay, so who are these people that are just so good that they couldn't even get an internship? Some of these people did not have, some of my the fellow interns who are awesome did not have experience in radio. So please remember that I imagine some of you will have experiences where you wonder if you're good enough. I mean, I wouldn't even spend a whole lot of time on that. A lot of time, there are a lot of factors that go into getting a job in an internship, and only part of it is talent. So it was very eye-opening to learn how these selections were made. So, but it was a really wonderful experience. Has anybody listened to the Takeaway from WNYC? No, that's okay. It's a nationally syndicated program, news and culture. Melissa Harris Perry just took over the hosting job, so I recommend it if you get a chance. Yeah, I got a chance to, working on a daily show is very different than a weekly show, and certainly the weekend evening news program that I did at KPFA. So it was booking guests, pitching ideas, paying attention to the news, and being just, it's very fast turnover. And I was there the year that President Trump won the election. And I will remember this forever. We were so convinced, we were one of those outlets that we were so convinced that that Hillary was going to win. We did not prepare a package about President Trump winning. And it was a mess, and there were tears. But it was just a good lesson to always be prepared and don't assume anything. But additionally with that, so I was doing an internship for about a few months over the summer, and then I was hired as they call it per diem, which is basically a contractor, a temp worker. So I worked for 3 months up until the end of the year, and I knew my contract was running out. And with places like WNYC, they will often, it's kind of like, just keep networking, just keep reminding the HR person or whoever is working with you, like, I'm here, I still want work, whatever, because they'll work with you, but also keep other options open. So at that time, I happened to book a guest for a segment on Cam Newton. Do any of you know him or heard of him? Okay, good. He's a quarterback in the NFL, and he very talented. And at the time, he'd accused some of the officials of making racist calls, basically not calling enough hits and stuff because he's Black. And we booked somebody to talk about that. And I liked this person. He just had like a good vibe. And so once the interview was over and we're finished taping, and we always send a thank you note, like, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I was like, my contract is ending. Do you need any help with anything? Like, I just straight out asked him, because I hustle. And he was like, actually, I do. Little did I know, this man was a journalist he had just left the New York Times, moving to ESPN, and he was looking for someone to help run a program at ESPN, which is how I got with the Undefeated. And so, yeah, it actually literally just worked out like that. Like, it wasn't, we sat down one day and I asked him what his management style was. I think that's very important. And we vibed, and he brought me along. And I ended up working at the Undefeated /ESPN, which it's the race and culture platform for ESPN, for 3 years, training HBCU students to get into the sports journalism pipeline. And at the same time, I was also writing stories and producing their podcast, which was about looking at sports and culture through the eyes of HBCU students. Absolutely wonderful experience, predominantly Black newsroom, the only one I've ever worked in. It was amazing, but I was part-time. So that was, fortunately I had a situation where I could afford that for a while, but there was a point where I was like, look, I think I've proven myself, and I want to be taken seriously as a journalist, not just as an admin. I think it's really easy, especially for women of color, to be, and really women, to get sucked into admin, especially if you're good at it. People will kind of like, oh, could you just, and you're like, no, I want to be here. And I think especially when you come in to an organization as an admin, sometimes it can be hard to change your perception. Not all the time, but sometimes. And so I did not successfully, I think I didn't change their perception. I think they were like, yeah, we love you as a journalist, but we like you here and in a part-time role. And I was like, I need to grow. And I was coworkers with someone who happened to know my boss, and they talked. And that is how I got my job, essentially at CNN. I got an interview, which again goes to make sure your friends, if no one else, know what you want to do, because you never know who's going to be at a party talking about, I need to hire somebody, and someone can say, oh, LaShanta needs this, or Paula needs that, So it actually, and I had, and never in my wildest dreams ever did I think I'd work at CNN. Like if you asked me even 5 years ago, I'd be like, no, of course not. I see it in, that's crazy. But it worked out. And I was hired as an associate producer in April of 2020 last year. So just as the pandemic was unfolding, and there was every day, it's like what to listen to, what not to listen to. And so I was essentially hired to help produce a podcast about the coronavirus. It's called Coronavirus Fact versus Fiction with Dr. Sanjay Gupta. It is now transitioned to be called Chasing Life, because now people are kind of like, how do you live within a pandemic, not just how do you myth bust, and it was it was so much cooler than I ever thought. I remember when I interviewed, my boss she's very nice, and she gave me a kind of a heads up, like, we're going to be doing this podcast about the coronavirus. And I'm like, oh, I'm hoping it'll be over in like 2 weeks. That didn't happen. But I was never a health reporter, but I kind of came into that. Yes. Vanity?
Yeah, hi, thank you for taking the time. You're very transparent, and I love that. My question is, what was the transition like going from ESPN, working with the Undefeated, to CNN, because they're both two big platforms?
Right. The transition. It was actually, so I'll answer that in two ways. The first one, of course, is that the Undefeated is a predominantly Black newsroom, and it is the focus is sports and culture. So we didn't get to really talk about politics unless LeBron specifically, when he called President Trump a bum, then we can go there. But without that, we can't really go there. As you saw, I don't know if you all remember, Jamel Hill got in a lot of trouble for tweeting that President Trump was a white supremacist. So it's a lesson for all of us. Then you move to CNN, where you could talk about politics all day. In fact, it's sports that we'll talk about sports, but it's more politics. So that was actually that was really nice, because it was like, there's so much I wanted to cover and be able to talk about. My team is pretty diverse, but not as Black. And that is, culturally, you can see it, feel it, but I have always felt very welcome to be myself, and that my ideas were taken seriously. And this is my first full-time journalism job, and I feel just so respected, and it feels so good. So, a white woman gave me my first full-time job, and I won't ever forget that. So it's been really great, and I've been pleasantly surprised by how my team actually, we have a bi-weekly series called Let's Talk About Race Plus, where we actually just sit and talk about how race impacts what we're seeing in the news and how we cover things. And we talk about everything from when should you go the extra mile to have a Black source versus a white source or an Asian American source, and how well are we covering Asian American issues, things like that. And it's really quite remarkable. And I think it's because the leadership at the top is open to it and really supportive of it. And I feel like CNN at large is also very supportive of those conversations.
Thank you. Yeah, very. Thank you.
So I could actually, let me stop here. I can talk more about what I do at CNN on the daily, or are there other questions people have? Happy to stop. I've been blabbing. Yes, I saw Uliana. And I'll get to everybody else. I see the other Selena and Aria.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you for talking to us. It's very interesting and inspiring, and it resonates with me a lot. I went to Columbia this year, but my program was the one for mid-career journalists, and we kind of didn't have a lot of access to equipment. And my prior experience was about broadcast journalism, radio and TV. And I was thinking that my dream job would be something that would allow me to marry my long form skills and investigative skills that I polished while at Columbia, and my deep passion for podcasts. So maybe you can talk a little bit about it, about like what kind of podcasts CNN has, in what way the company is planning to go.
Sure. So wow, we have especially our slate coming up in 2022 is really exciting. But I would say we have a range of podcasts ranging from like kind of short political news. We have, it's called the CNN Political Briefing. Every day we have a rundown of kind of like the big events. We also have something called CNN 5 Things, which is like, it's produced several times a day, and it gives you the 5 things you need to know about each day and throughout the day, which is really helpful. And then, something like what I do, Silence is Not an Option, I would consider that to be long form. We're part of what is called the original series team. And that is, it's weekly, not daily. And, as Eryn introduced, we talk about, the roots of racism and how they impact what's happening today. There's also, let's see, we have a new show out. Actually, it's if you all can check it out, it's amazing. It's called Tug of War, and it's looking at the fight for democracy around the world and how well it's going, and looking at Syria, Nicaragua, Sudan, Myanmar, and kind of like the struggle for freedom there and how people are fighting or not. And it's just so sound rich. And just really honest. There's also Chasing Life, which I mentioned, which was daily. Now it's weekly, and it talks about how to live well during a pandemic. So kind of like this week we had a episode called Food as Medicine, kind of like just looking at what are you eating and how has it impacted COVID, and how is it impacting your life now. So for investigative, I think I'm not going to say much, but there are some shows coming down where it's going to require some investigative reporting, and it will be part of a long form series. And so there definitely are opportunities. And in fact, there is I can tell you later on, I'll tell you about a couple jobs that are coming up. Let's see. I hope was that good, Uliana? Okay. Selena, yes. And then.
Hi, Eryn.
Hi.
I'm Selena. I'm currently an undergrad at NYU, and it's so interesting that you said you work for WNYC, and I'm actually a part of a radio station at NYU called WNYU. So nice. It's sort of following a pattern there. So there's like a lot of aspects of your job that really interests me. One part was that you work for a radio station, which is essentially what I'm doing as a news reporter here. Yeah. And I'm also producing my own podcast, which is like the second half of your career.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
I'm doing a podcast called East Village Love Stories, which is kind of a East Village version, New York version of the whole modern love from New York Times. And I was just curious, like as a producer, what are something that you could recommend to like a podcast that you're starting off? What are ways that you can reach to a greater audience or something to watch out for? Because we've only been on the show for like 2 months, and it's been hard to get submissions, first of all, and it's been hard to run the social media and get people's attention to it. What are some of your advice? Thank you.
Yeah. And so Selena, I can definitely talk more with you offline about this, because I think it can be a process, but the first things that come to mind are consistency and marketing. So I think where a lot of people get caught up is, you'll produce an episode maybe on a Tuesday, and then maybe it'll be 2 weeks later. And then people don't really, it's like people need something they can rely on that's coming out, or if it's going to be kind of like a limited series, like you're going to do 8 shows, make sure people know when and where they can find them. So I think that's important. And that's just getting it out. We can even talk about production. I think with marketing, that's also hard. I don't know if do you have guests on the show, or is it mainly, okay. I think it's really helpful when the guests will promote as well once you put out a show to do that. I think there are a couple of listservs. Are you familiar with, there's like New York Public Radio, there's Ladio, Gadio. There's like a bunch of listservs that you can also just kind of like email and just, hey, everybody, this is a show that's out. You should know about this. I find that to be helpful. And I don't know if the school has a social media person that could promote your show, do they?
Yeah, I wasn't really familiar with what the New York State Radio promoter that you're talking about, but the school does have some resources. But
Okay.
You have to like actively reach out to those.
Do that, because people know NYU for sure. So if you can get them to promote what you're doing, that would be great. And I can definitely hit you up offline about some of the listservs that I mentioned, because I think those could be helpful and it's out there. And then I think talk about like budgeting and funding and stuff too.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will send a message after this. I don't want to take up too much time for other people.
No problem. Thank you. Aria, and then I'll get to Paula.
Hi, Eryn. This is really funny because Selena and I know each other, and I was about to ask like a similar question. So I'm also a reporter at WNYU, and I also host my own podcast. It's called What the New York with Ed and Ari. It's kind of like a comedy news show where we talk about like weird news in New York and we joke about it. Yeah, thank you. So I really want to go into audio journalism, and I really admire your path and what you've done. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, like on the production side of audio journalism or just podcasting, what do you think is the most important skill that someone like me should like hone in college?
And you want to be a producer, is what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, step 1, do you know Pro Tools? The audio editing software.
Yes, so I do edit my own shows. I use Logic, but I'm not like super techie. Like I know the basics and I can edit a show by myself, but not like I can't like tweak audio like to make it sound the best that I want. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That is okay. I would say everyone learn Pro Tools. Logic, Audition, Hindenburg, all those are great and they're all very similar, but Pro Tools is becoming the industry standard, and I think a lot of places like CNN in particular look for people who know Pro Tools. We are willing to help teach, but it's very helpful if you come in already kind of knowing. And I know it is expensive, so definitely see if NYU can kind of help with getting, if they have any discounts or if they can just hook you up, or whatever school you're at. But yeah, I'd say that's step 1. And it's okay that we have engineers and sound designers, so you don't have to know everything, but it's good to just get familiar with like the just kind of regular bells and whistles of editing. I would say also, how do you feel about pitching stories, and how do you go about finding stories?
So that's definitely something that I want to work on more, because I do pitch stories. Like I'm an editor at WNYU, but I also feel like not like often enough, like if I see something that I'm really interested, then I will pitch it and do it, but I'm bad at just like going out and looking for stories. So I guess, I don't know if you have any advice on like pitching and just finding stories.
Yeah, so something I like to play is like every day I try to like ask myself, like as I'm just walking through life, 5 questions. Like, on my way here, I'm like, why is the 7 train on the way to Hudson Yards so nice? And the 1 train, when you go up to by my house, is so not. Like, why is that? Is that just funding? Is it because Hudson Yards is becoming touristy? Stuff like that. When I was in a cab the other day and I was like, do the cab drivers have a deal with ABC? Because I'm only seeing this certain news on, in the TV that they play, and I'm like, what's up with that? Like, can anybody get on this? And so I just ask little questions that come up can lead to stories. You do need to work on pitching, because I will say that people who are vocal tend to get noticed, and for better or worse, I don't think it's fair. And I think this is something I'm working on at my job, is like, just because you're quiet doesn't mean that you're not smart or have ideas, but people don't know those ideas unless you talk, or unless you share them in some way. So, and I would say, when you find an idea, don't just there's a difference between a topic and a story. And a topic is like, what's a good topic? I guess just love. You said comedic stories within New York. I would just say, like, I don't have a comedic story, but a story I recently pitched was, I want to look at, you guys heard about young Dolph, the murder of young Dolph yesterday, the tragic.
Yeah, I've heard of it. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was so sad. 36, leaves 2 children, a wife behind. I was pitching, we should take a look at young Dolph and how it connects to the rising homicide rates around the US and kind of major cities. And so what I did is I got all the information. I'm like, okay, look at what happened to young Dolph. Look at what's happening with homicide. Is there a correlation we can make? I'm not sure yet, but I'm putting it out there. So you kind of want to be specific. You want to kind of like have a really clear, what's the question, and be able to answer as much of it as you can. So I think in a pitch, sometimes there are obviously things you can't answer without more reporting, but you want to get as much as you can. And that, I think, shows your boss or your editor that you know how to look for things. And when you start a job, make sure you're pitching. Like, when I got to CNN, I think it was the first week, I made sure I had at least a pitch to share with my boss, because I wanted her to know what matters to me and how I pitch, and that I'm like serious about the job. So, and you can always like run it by people, like, don't worry, but just get out there.
Sorry, I was just wondering, is it part of your job to pitch, or do you?
Yes.
Would you like? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It is a part of my job. And also, but I'm also just like, I watch the news every morning. I watch in New York 1, the local news, and I love CBS This Morning and CNN. So I love Gayle King. And so I'm always like, okay, what are they talking about? What do I need to know? I also look at Teen Vogue. I look at, of course, CNN, the New York Times, and Complex, just to kind of get like a diverse look at like what's happening, so I can like be up on stuff. Okay, we can also get in touch later, Aria. Paula.
Hi, Eryn. Hello, everybody. Well, thank you for your time. I was wondering, how did your short-term storytelling help your long-term storytelling? Because you mentioned that's how you started.
It's a great question, Paula. I mean, it was kind of like I was stepping my toe into the industry. And so I think when I first did news of the short term, I just kind of had to learn how to write a very quick, succinct story. I think that's, and you'll hear often, are you all familiar with the term storytelling for the ear? Yeah, kind of. So basically, the way you tell a story is often different than the way you'd see it written. Like, when you look at the New York Times, it's very like lots of beautiful language, and there are a lot of things that are very, it's easy to understand, but it's not necessarily how you would say it out loud. And so storytelling for the ear is kind of like trying to kind of simplify ideas and not get too convoluted. And how would this person actually say this in real time? So I think that was one of the best things I learned from the newsroom. And also, how to synthesize information quickly, because it's like a lot of times I will walk in on a Saturday and I will get the fish story about contamination in this whatever lake. I've never heard of this lake. To be quite honest, don't judge me. I didn't know young Dolph. I was like, who is this man that everybody's crying about? But I'm like, but you can dig and you can find quickly, and you start to learn like, what are the pieces of information that you really need to know, that your audience would need to know. In my case, like, okay, he was 36. He died in Memphis. The police chief says it's too early to know what motivated it. And they put, Memphis on watch. These are the things my team needs to know, And so I think I got quick at that, and that has helped even with my the long form audio, because you still need to know those basics, but we just get to expound more. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yasmin, am I pronouncing that correctly? And then I'll go to Amy.
Sorry. Sorry, but I'm pretty sure Chantorian raised her hand before me.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's so sweet of you. Sorry, I didn't see it. Chantorian, please.
Oh, thank you so much. My question is, how do you navigate pitching or speaking about stories that may be culturally relevant to you and may have an impact on you? And how do you decipher what points should you hit on that your audience would connect to? How do you navigate that?
I think it's very helpful, the parameters of the show, right? So with Silence is Not an Option, we talk about the roots of racism and how they connect to racism today. So within that context, I can be like, okay, it was the impetus for the whole show was actually George Floyd. And how do we, what should people, as people are having a so-called racial reckoning, I say that because sometimes we ask, what did we really reckon? And how long did it last? But we can get into that later. So we would pitch stories like that. So I think our first episode, we talked to Ibram X. Kendi about anti-racism and what that is. I also produced a show called The Handoff with Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon. It's about politics and pop culture. It's not specifically about race, but I think if there's something big in the news, we can talk about it. So I pitched a story about, that they talk about the judge in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, not the judge, the defense attorney who asked Reverend Jesse Jackson not to attend, and he said he felt like the Black pastors were influencing things, and then they got 100. I think they're gonna be 200 actually. So I was like, I think that's very significant. Was that? And my question was that crazy that the judge or the defense attorney even tried that? Is that even legal? So I think you just have to really be clear about the parameters of your show and what you can do. I will say this happens a lot, and don't be afraid of it. Sometimes you will, I don't know if I'm talking about race, but it could be anything that you think is important. There'll be times when you think there is a racial angle to a story and your editor might not. And those conversations can be tricky, but they are worth having, but they should be done with care. And I think, honestly, I think every situation is different, but I will say, don't be afraid to have those conversations, and don't be afraid to at least put it out there. You might get shot down, but I think it's worth saying this should be a part of the story and here's why, and have a really cogent argument for why. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, was it Yasmin and then Amy? Yeah. No, I love that you did that, Yasmin. Thank you. That's good looking out. Good looking out.
Well, we are here to work together. So, okay, my question is, I'm not an English native speaker because I'm Cuban and I arrived here, already an adult. And my question is, do you think that CNN and other news platform have space for other language podcast production? And there exists, because the only good podcast I know in Spanish made in the US is oh my God, I forgot the name, something by NPR, which is very popular. But
are you talking about, and then there's, do you know Radio Ambulante?
Yes, Radio Ambulante. Yeah, I keep it's just they turned too dark during the pandemic, so I stopped hearing it because pandemic. But anyway, the point is this the only podcast in Spanish? And my question is, do you think there is a space or is growing or is already there and I don't know about it for podcasts in the news in Spanish produced in the US?
Yes. CNN has a arm called CNN Espanol, and there are, I don't have the list in front of me, and I'm so sorry, I don't have more like the names of the shows off top, but definitely like the coronavirus fact versus fiction podcast I was telling you about, it was produced in Spanish with a Spanish speaking doctor. His name is Elmer Huerta. So we definitely put that out there. There are other shows. I would just have to find them and I'm happy to send them to you. But yes, so CNN is absolutely on top of that. I do think there is, I think we could do more and I think there is space. I know that with the Tug of War podcast, for instance, Megan Marcus just put in the chat where you can find the CNN Espanol shows. Thank you so much, Megan. That's my boss, by the way. Shout out to her. I know, right? I love that. Yeah, so but Tug of War, I also wanted to mention, you will hear different languages. We made sure to that you heard, I mean, it's the narration is done in English, but you'll hear different languages as well. So there's definitely space. And I think that's a great point that I think so we're all over the world. So we have to look at different languages for sure. Amy.
Hey, thanks so much for doing this. So I love podcasts, and I was wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about the different roles, like what the producer versus a host versus a reporter does, because I really love the idea of writing, and I just kind of wonder how that all fits in, is when you move up, to like a CNN versus working for like a smaller town for like a local radio station or something.
Sure. And Amy, are you interested in production or hosting, or are you feeling you're figuring that out?
I'm still figuring it out. I've been working in local news as a reporter, but I really love listening to podcasts. And so I'm trying to figure out kind of what my next step is.
Awesome. And this is a great question. I'm so glad you brought it up, because there are within an audio team, there are a range of positions you can have to help with the overall production. So I'm a producer, so that means that I am pitching stories, I am editing tape, I am writing scripts for the host. What else am I doing? Sometimes I come up with tweets to help promote the show. And overall, I'm constantly thinking about, just like what is the show? What do we want to do? How is it growing? And I'm also kind of gut checking. Like sometimes the host will say something in a certain way. They'll make a joke, and I'm like, is that okay? Like, do we want to use this? Do we want to use this guest? Like, is this guest has kind of some baggage here? Like, is that might not be the best for the show? So you're kind of like looking at a lot of things that go into this. And we have. In addition to just my personal fact checking, we have a fact checking department. And so I deal with them too. So when I finally have a script, I will send it off. It's called Triad. And they kind of will ask me questions like, oh, did you think about this? So it's like this, it's a long process. So that's producing. So I would call it behind the scenes. I'm not on air often. Sometimes I get to do little things. But yeah, and I like that. I enjoy, this is what you should talk about, but I'm going to do it. I don't need to you take it away, you add your pizzazz. I think a host obviously is you are the conduit. Like you get the information and it's your job to put it out there in a really interesting way. And I think to me, what I am most impressed by about hosts is that, you have to improvise. Like sometimes someone will throw a crazy question at you and you have to be ready and poised and go. And, you'll have producers to help you answer questions, but it's kind of on you. So I think it takes a certain kind of bravado and confidence, which I think is wonderful. And I would say that, and within that, producers do a lot of talent management as well. So if you give a read that's kind of crummy, I have to, in a nice way, be like, can we do that again? Can you give it a little more, put the emphasis on this word? Or you said that too fast, and do it in a way that hopefully you're not too annoying. Sometimes I am, but that's my job. And let's see, there's also promotion and marketing. we like I was telling, I'm sorry, who, Shantorian, I think, or not sure, sorry, forgive me. Promotion is important. So we have an audio product team that just make sure that we are getting our shows on, Apple, and we're promoting it, and it's getting out. We're tweeting about it like 5 times a day. And what's the best way to tweet about it? And what relationships do we have? And does the rest of CNN even know about it? So like that part is super crucial and really important. Yeah, so there's, let's see, so it's hosting, production, audio product. You said reporting. I would say, yeah, I'd say producers often serve as reporters, but sometimes we actually work with reporters. So for the Tug of War podcast, when you listen, like the host is Clarissa Ward, who is a reporter. So we asked her to go out. She went to Afghanistan and she went to Syria, and we're like, we want to do this story. So can you please get tape of this and this and this? We'd love to get some of your interviews, and ask her to even record her personal, like, I'm walking through, the town square and it's crazy and like she's recording that. So sometimes the producer is a reporter and sometimes you work with them as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah, super helpful, super helpful.
Cool. I would just say what's the difference between the market. It's like probably the egos are bigger at CNN, honestly. The money is more, so that comes with it. But it's definitely something you can totally do. It's like kind of read the room, and you get a sense of the culture. Yeah. Lucy. And then Tracy.
Hello, can you hear me fine?
Yes, again.
Okay, great. So I was video off for this because I was actually listening in from a walk up until this point, but I just got back. And thank you so much for doing this. I'm a grad from Fordham University's master's program in strategic communication. And I have been working in PR for a couple of years. I always was also super interested. My other dream career was podcast producing. I just frankly don't have the technical skills. So that was super helpful that you specified the pro tools. Maybe I'll take some time on my own to learn that over time. But getting to my question. So the superstar PR manager of Hinge said something really inspirational on a webinar once, where he said, be a PR friend, not a PR pest. So what I love to do as someone who consistently pitches our CEO for podcast and radio opportunities is just get a sense firsthand of what the most helpful way to do that is. As someone who's booked guests, what do you like to see from PR people? What's a helpful way of delivering information?
That's a great question. The PR people, I'm not off, I don't get hit up by PR people all the time, but with the ones, what I appreciate is when people are, I often hear when people are writing books and they'll be like, so-and-so just wrote this book and they'd be great for this podcast. I tend to share that with my team. We might do it or not, but it's good to just know about it, And sometimes I'll even share it, like if I have friends in other at other outlets who might be doing a show that they could use it more, I'll be like, hey, check this out, So I don't mind. I think for me, I understand PR. You all got to just get the word out there, and it's kind of more, several times. So I think I get hit up like a couple times a week by even different podcast outlets, like, hey, did you hear about this? Like, if you want to write about it. And that's fine with me. I just, I don't know. There's some emails that I'm like, I know you don't expect a response, or I think you don't. And there's some emails where I'm like, okay, I need to correspond with this person. This might be a good connection for CNN. And so that's kind of just helpful to kind of, I think when you personalize it a little more, you're like, hey, Eryn, I'm wondering if you do this specifically, then I kind of know, okay, this is not just a mass email to a bunch of people. It's like, you need me to respond, And I love being invited to kind of live tapings and events, because it's good to see, it's cool to see what other people are doing and to meet other people in the industry.
Awesome, super helpful. Thank you.
Tracy?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. Recently graduated from Mount St. Mary mid-career, went back and got my master's in radio, TV, film. And you sound like you have been very good at learning to pivot. I was just hoping maybe you can speak to the fact you touched on it about having the network within the company.
Yes.
And how familiar are you with how your New York branch works with Los Angeles? And if you could talk about transferable skills a little bit, because you touched on it a little bit, and if you could go into it a little bit more.
Sure. So the LA office I'm very, I've been at CNN for almost 2 years, mainly in New York because of the pandemic. So I have worked a little bit with the LA office because Don actually had to record, I work with Don Lemon and I had to record, he was there for something and we needed the studio. So I kind of got to know some of the folks there. And some of my colleagues are based in LA as well. But I would say I don't know the LA office that well. So actually, it's a good point. And I do try to, we use Slack. Does everybody know Slack? Yeah. Okay. So we use Slack a lot. So I do try to message people that way and just like, hey, even if I personally try to, I'm glad you said in networking, because I like to network, keep the fires burning with people outside, like still at ESPN, WNYC, but also within, because I want people to know I think they did good work, and I want to meet people within the organization, and that's a good way to do it. As far as transferable skills, I would say my admin experience, because I did a lot of admin for nonprofits, has been very helpful as a producer, because you're kind of organized, you kind of know how to talk to people over email, you know how to have sensitive conversations when people are rude, and you have to kind of help navigate the conversation. I think that has been very helpful. And I think I just try not to get stuck in, I'm happy to help, but I'm also, my job is to do this. So, and that has been great. Let's see, what else? I worked as a personal trainer for a while. So being a sports journalist, it's not, we will do sports stories here, but that's not our focus. So that knowledge has actually, I think, helped set me apart from my colleagues. I don't know that I'm not trying to pigeonhole myself as the sports girl, but I love that, when sports stuff comes up, people come to me, and I get to weigh in on how stories are covered, or pitch them myself. I'd say the personal training stuff, sometimes that comes in handy. We did a fitness episode during the coronavirus fact versus fiction days, and I went out and found a celebrity trainer, and that was kind of cool. So you just kind of never know when your life experiences are going to affect your job. And I'd say just let it shine, Is that helpful?
That is, thank you. I don't know if I said fellow Howard alum, so your words really resonate.
Hello, Bison. Nice to meet you. Okay, I'm being told we need to wrap it up. So I guess Eryn, we're closing out.
I think that's about what we have time for. So everyone, let us thank Eryn. That was amazing. Some really specific advice for both the podcasting field, but also great general advice, perseverance, getting over that imposter syndrome, and the importance of networks, even if they're your friends and your siblings, everyone can be a network and help you out along the way. So thank you so much for taking the time, Eryn. And, like we said earlier, she has graciously agreed to connect on LinkedIn with y'all. So the link to her profile is in the chat if you want to take her up on that.
Please do.